Good afternoon. Welcome to Scrutiny, and we'll start with apologies. We've had apologies from councillors Prinsley, Fulton McAllister and Osborne, who are subbed by councillors Maguire, Sands and Champion, respectively. Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest? No? Okay, thank you. Minutes are to follow, so we'll get those at January's meeting. Yeah, thank you. So without any further ado, on to item 4, which is our draft Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan. And Councillor Giles, you're going to present that for us, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Do you want me to go through the action plan and do questions and then the EIR and questions?
Yeah, so we'll take those as two separate items. So we'll do the action plan, questions, potential recommendations from members, and obviously thanks to the officers who are here to help answer some of those questions. So we'll do those, but we'll do those as two separate. Although I appreciate there will be some cross-pollination between those, but I think we'll keep them as two separate items to make the recommendations easier.
Okay, no, thank you, Chair. Bringing a report to you today, firstly on the proposed EDI action plan from 2024 to 2027. So the EDI action plan sits under the EDI strategy that was brought to Scrutiny Committee 12 months ago and approved in January. I want to thank all of the officers here for their fantastic contributions towards this report. I want to particularly thank Joe Siggins, who's led on the production of the action plan over the course of this calendar year. The action plan has been produced in collaboration with all service areas and the actions set out across all cabinet portfolios. While political leadership of our corporate EDI policies sit with myself, given the vast and cross-cutting nature of the action plan, as a note of caution, I won't have time in this presentation to go through the plan in detail. And in relation to questions and answers, you will have to forgive me in advance for not being across the detail of all the actions contained in the plan. It is right, isn't it? I'm not.
Yeah, literally the same thing happened.
Okay.
Deep sense of suspense between sides.
Is it just slow, is it?
It was just, yeah, there were lots of dramatic reasons.
Okay. So we will put equality and inclusion front and centre of our thinking. So since the approval of the EDI strategy in January, the City Council has approved our new community-led plan. The quote on this screen is one of the guiding principles which inform everything we do, and as such pervades all 5 community-led plan priorities. Where it fits. So where does the action plan sit? Well, it's already been highlighted that the action plan sits under our EDI strategy and responds to our community-led plan. It primarily sits under the Fairer Norwich priority in our community-led plan, but there are also evidently overlaps with other priorities. It incorporates various motions passed by full council and a number of initiatives and national developments over the past year. It will be targeted at those areas in greatest need, aligning with our new RETA, reducing inequality target areas, realigned on lower super output areas. That's significantly smaller geographic areas than the MSOA, medium super output levels that they're currently based at. It both responds to and will seek to shape future council policies and strategies across the council. And finally, it contributes to our evidence base for our scheduled internal audit of equalities scheduled for the final quarter of this financial year. It's going quicker now. So this is a reminder of the 3 objectives that were set out 12 months ago in the EDI strategy. So the first is Norwich City Council is an inclusive place to work. This primarily relates to our own workforce and our HR services. The second objective is our services will be joined up, accessible and inclusive. And that primarily relates to services that we directly deliver ourselves. And then the third objective is Norwich is a fair city where people facing inequality can share in and contribute to the city's success. And this primarily relates to our enabling and partnership work in influencing broader investment and opportunities in shaping a fairer Norwich. The actions, outcomes and outputs in the EDI action plan sit under the priorities set out in the EDI strategy under these objectives on your screen. It is acknowledged that these actions in a number of cases cut across multiple priorities and in some cases multiple objectives. This is just to reassure Alistair if he's watching. All actions within the plan can be delivered within existing budgetary resources and the budgetary allocations we've made in the draft budget that was presented to Cabinet yesterday. Consultation. So this slide illustrates the consultation process through which the action plan has been through, some of which I've already discussed. The action plan was subject to a peer challenge of a significant number of partner organisations and networks of partners as listed in detail in your report. It is also important to stress that the action plan reflects the more extensive consultation on the EDI strategy 12 months ago, and also the very extensive consultation on the community-led plan earlier this year. Slide 7. So there was a 50% response rate from partners, and this slide sets out some of the headlines that came out of that feedback. So the headlines included partners wishing to work more closely with the council, partners keen for improvements in the way the council consults and engages with them, and where digital inclusion was referenced, peers asked that services remain accessible through traditional means for those who need them, despite the council's, in the context of the council's ongoing digitisation. Revisions. Okay. In response to the consultation exercise, the first thing to stress, and perhaps should have said this at the start if I'd have followed Dave's advice, is to stress that this action plan is a live document. Its consideration here today at Scrutiny Committee and at Cabinet in January is the start of the conversation with partners and not the end, and that's critical to think about. There's been limited time between the consultation and today's meeting. We have made some low-level changes and are in discussions with relevant service areas about implementing other low-level changes. With regards to more detailed changes requested and coming out of the feedback, we will have and have started more detailed discussions over alignment and viability with Cabinet colleagues and relevant service areas to see how partners' feedback can be addressed. Format and reporting. So as set out, the EDI action plan will be a live document. Unlike the EDI strategy, which is fixed for a certain time period and public, it is intended that the EDI action plan sitting under it will be primarily an internal facing document for officers and elected members to consider in their day-to-day work. Formal and publicly accountable monitoring and reporting of progress on the action plan will be through the annual mechanism of the annual equality information reports. And we have the this year's EIR following this item. This also illustrates that top level KPIs are also being developed to be monitored on a quarterly, obviously more regular basis. And now it's on to the EIR, so I'm happy to take questions for moving forwards.
Okay, thank you very much, and for the presentation. So members, who has questions for either Councillor Giles or for Nick, Joe, Max, or Dawn? I don't know, we've got a place setting for you. I don't know if you want to come and join the table. Thank you. So Councillor Davis first, then Councillor Maguire, then Councillor Carrington.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Adam. I wondered if there was a place for the new equality duty that came in on the 26th of October to be added into this. So the new equality duty is around preventing sexual harassment in the workplace, and it came into force on the 26th of October this year. So I don't know if that's something that needs to be added in, but obviously the recommendation from the government is that workplaces have their own policy in place regarding it.
Thank you. No, I mean, evidently, whether it's a statutory requirement or not, we'd want to ensure we've got an adequate policy in place to ensure robust dealings with any sexual harassment allegations that might be received in the workplace. Dawn, I don't know if you're able to provide any more detail on.
Oh, so can I just can you remind everyone to use their mics, because otherwise anyone watching won't be picking it up if they're not.
Okay. So I can tell you a little bit about the piece of work that we've been doing around this. So although we've not got a specific sexual harassment policy at this point in time, what we've done is adapted our harassment and bullying policy that covers sexual harassment in terms of under the Worker Protection Act. We've also got a whole action plan around it, Councillor Davis, which, you know, obviously I'm kind of happy to provide some information if that would be helpful. So we went to our extended leadership team a little while ago with the actions that we were proposing, the training that we're going to be rolling out across the organisation, and also specifically for managers around dealing with sexual harassment, kind of in the workplace and outside. Obviously, you'll have picked up from the legislation how it was originally proposed. There were some amendments, but I think there will be future changes coming forward. But I'm happy to give a briefing around what's happening around Worker Protection Act.
Just add to that that's the joy of this being a live document and iteratively updated. We anticipate quite a number of macro developments going forward from government, etc. And indeed, we already have quite a number of changes that we need to be making to it. So indeed, we can incorporate that. It's not a problem.
Thank you for that. Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Chair. Most of this is this plan, the action plan, and how we're going to approach and deal with others, which is good. And one of them I was pleased to see in the slide was those who are not digitally as literate as others. And I'm just wondering how that will play out. I must admit that as a elected member, there have been occasions where people have been told report it online. Can you just say a little bit more about the actuality of providing an analog interface?
Thank you, Kevin. So in the context of the council's, growing digitisation, you'll have seen in the customer and digital strategy, it's clear that for those who still require those traditional analog perhaps means, whether it's a face-to-face appointment or to phone, that those options are still available. And I certainly acknowledge that there are certain residents whose lives are perhaps particularly chaotic at certain points in time, or they have particularly complex issues. And while digital options work well for many residents, people like myself paying their council tax, etc. And where it can generate efficiency, that's great. But for those who still do need those traditional mechanisms, it's important they're still in place when requested. I'm not sure if anyone on the officer side has any more to add.
No, but we can take any concerns you have back to the head of customers IT and digital, because obviously she is the action owner of those particular actions.
Thank you. Councillor Carrington.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of short questions. Is that okay? So I just wanted to know, first of all, was there any consultation with groups representing people with mental health needs, including people who lack capacity, and if so, what the responses were? That's my first question. And my second one relates to page 24 about age champions, and I'd like to know what is in place to support younger people in entering the workforce, and also to gain promotion due to their often perceived lack of experience.
Thank you, Jess. So firstly, in relation to consultation, so we among the consultees was the Norwich Health and Wellbeing Partnership, but that's not one entity, that's a network of many different organisations that were consulted under that heading, as it were. And while I haven't got a full list of those organisations in front of me, I'm aware that Together and NSFT were both consulted. Unfortunately, we haven't had responses from them. Obviously, there are a number of other agencies that do work with and represent those with mental health conditions, but I can't think of any organisation that works exclusively on that topic. In relation to the latter question, so we do offer apprenticeships within the council, as you'll be aware, with a number of teams along with the grad scheme. We currently have 12 apprentices working for the council and 2 on a grad scheme. We are looking at adapting our recruitment processes to look to encourage applications from people with non-standard qualifications and lived experience that meet the requirements of the job, but perhaps wouldn't have been considered historically. And we're also seeking to publicise our commitment to equality to potential job applicants, because we know that the EDI credentials of an employer are really important to a lot of young people graduating from university or coming out of college or school and looking for employment. There are also internal opportunities for all staff, such as project work, secondments, and temporary acting up. There may also be opportunities to secure support of continuing professional development through training agreements, depending on the role that they're filling. But thank you for those questions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fox.
Yeah, I've got a couple of short points as well, if that's okay. So on page 23, where it talks about sort of neurodiversity, physical, sensory, mental, and or learning disabilities and difficulties, it says that the way that success is kind of, or the measure of success is that the number of requests for reasonable adjustments and the number of reasonable adjustments made by the council are measured. And I wondered whether it would be better to actually survey like staff who do have those needs and to see whether they're satisfied, because you know, if the adjustments have helped or not really. And then the other point I wanted to ask about was on the section where it talks about work-life balance and people's mental health. I wondered whether it's a good opportunity to properly explore the 4-day working week and the benefits that that could bring.
So in relation to the first question, yes, yeah, I take on board what you're saying. So under measures of success for making reasonable adjustments for employees with physical, sensory, mental and or learning disabilities, difficulties, you know, it's looking at how successful those reasonable adjustments were at overcoming the barriers they were facing. I think it'd be a good idea to add an additional measure of success in relation to that. It's in relation to the 4-day week. We'll continue to work in partnership with the Unison branch here at City Hall to look at work-life balance issues to enhance the diversity of our staff. But as you're aware, it's not the policy of this council at this moment in time to move to a 4-day week.
Thank you. Councillor Padder, and apologies for forgetting you. I was supposed to bring you in after Councillor Carrington.
That's okay, don't worry. Switching off. If there was anywhere in you know, people with caring responsibilities and also menopause and perimenopause and for within the workforce, and also something as well as councillors and how we support each other. So that's my just a general reflection. The question, I suppose, is I was pleased to see EDI and we're taking EDI issues very seriously here. And you know, as you know, climate change and EDI, I think, should run to through the core of our services. So that's really good for me to see. What I have been looking at in my own time is some academic work in EDI, and mostly based on racial equality, diversity, inclusivity. And there's an academic at Harvard who's been bringing together racial EDI and kind of data-driven EDI in HR processes, and bringing those two kind of academic worlds and practical worlds together in HR practices. So I was wondering, I guess, whether there are processes by which you will be bringing the latest thinking in EDI into HR processes, whether there's a mechanism to bring that in. Anyway, I'll put that out there.
I'll pass over to Dawn, but you know, in terms of the first point, you may have seen that we've you know, recently been accredited as an age-friendly city here in Norwich, and as part of that, I understand there is some piece of work going on in relation to supporting our members of staff who may be going through the menopause, and Dawn can talk about that in further detail. But we'll, as per my previous answer to Councillor Fox, we'll continue working in partnership with the Unison branch to on inclusive working practices. And you know, I appreciate that's perhaps not made as explicit as it could have been within the draft action plan. In relation to the point you make about better use of statistics with regards to racism and HR processes, I think that's a very interesting comment, and you've obviously got significant expertise. You're picking up on that. I think it'd be really useful to draw on that, and I'll pass over to Dawn for more detail.
Thank you. So just just a little bit more information about the menopause and perimenopause. I suppose in terms of what's presented to you in terms of the action plan, a lot of stuff that we already do as part of our day-to-day bread and butter stuff, really. So kind of you take it a little bit for granted. So we did a couple of years ago actually set up a menopause group. We've bought some resources. We've looked at some training to kind of inform. So we had some really successful sessions here at City Hall where there's kind of quite a lot of interest in it. We've also, you're probably aware, we've got a mental health and well-being group as well, which kind of get involved in lots of things. We've got mental health first aiders that often get involved in, you know, issues that women are raising around menopause type issues. So there are things in place, support mechanisms in place, and managers are really quite geared up to support that. We've not got a formal menopause policy. It's something that we've been thinking about as part of our employment policy refresh, but we have got some kind of guidance and support available there. Just kind of also picking up in terms of how we use kind of academic information in terms of informing our policies, particularly around obviously changing the workforce profile. So a couple of years ago, I did bring a report to Cabinet, particularly on the back of the Black Lives Matters issues that were raised at that time, and we've got an ongoing programme of things that we will do. But in terms of when we're developing policies and practices, we do lots of benchmarking, so including academic research. But obviously I am interested to, if you've seen something that's really kind of, yeah, right telling, I'm happy for you to share that with us for that to inform our policy making. We also then, obviously, with development of any policies, we go through the normal legal compliance checks. As Councillor Giles has mentioned, we formally consult with Unison as well as informally. So our Unison branch are really very good at bringing forward things that are happening nationally in the trade union world around a whole range of issues to inform policies. So we do that very collaboratively.
If I may, Chair, just flicking down. Sorry, I can't remember all of the actions. At the top of page 24, in terms of strengthening our commitment to age-friendly recruitment, supporting employees of all ages to flourish in a multi-generational workforce. I won't read out all of it, but there's a commitment to sign up to the age-friendly employer pledge as well. And it just in relation to racism, our ongoing commitment to the Unison Anti-Racism Charter, which we signed a couple of years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Champion.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was particularly interested in the continue to develop inclusive working practices and policies and build upon what Councillor Fox was saying in relation to neurodivergence. I would be curious to see, in addition to employees being able to self-identify or to put so that we're able to gauge how much neurodiversity we've got within the institution. In addition to that, I would be very keen to see additional training and awareness raising so that we are able to consult staff on how best to support people with a range of neurodiverse challenges within the workforce. I believe that might just build upon what Councillor Fox was saying previously.
Thank you, Gary, for the question. So we don't currently have separate or specific neurodiversity training. I'm not sure in terms of self-declaration, in terms of disabilities, whether we specifically, look at self-declaration for neurodiversity. I'd have to pass that over to Dawn. But just going back to training, so the following is generic equalities and inclusion training, but so what was currently provided is unconscious bias e-learning module, being inclusive, an inclusive leadership module, and a customer service excellence module, which is obviously broader. All of our core people manager training also includes recruitment and selection for managers. Training also covers relevant equalities aspects. The focus of that training is how to support and promote creating an inclusive environment. However, having said that, we are currently looking at options and specifically evaluating a package of online EDI training, which will be delivered via our learning platform room, which all employees and workers and councillors will have access to. And this package will include or does include, if it's adopted, content specific to working with those with neurodiversity. And we will look to roll this or an alternative out in the new year or new financial year, depending on cost and demands on the corporate learning and development budget.
Thank
Dawn,
you.
I don't know if you're able to, about self-identification.
May I just come back on that point? Sorry, just briefly.
Yep, briefly.
Do
Do you want to hear from Dawn first and then come back once you've heard?
Yes, happily.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up the issue of the point about self-declaration. I would need to double check. I don't think we do have a self-declaration. We're actually looking at a campaign around share not declare. You can see later on that actually we have a number of people that have not reported various things, but I can certainly look at having that added in terms of as part of our kind of a collection of workforce data. But what I would say is that we do have a workforce that do share. So I think it was last year we had a relatively new employee that actually talked to a number of colleagues, including HR, regarding his own experience as being neurodivergent and applying for a job with Norwich City Council, his experience as an employee here, which we took some learning from. So I think there is actually, when we talk about, we may not have some of those formal mechanisms for collecting information, but I think we do have a workforce that are happy to share some of the challenges that they may have and some of their experiences and work together about actually how we can improve things.
It's reassuring to hear. I guess my point is, I'm in my 40s. When I was diagnosed with dyslexia as a young, many years ago, lots of other neurodivergent traits, which I believe I'd now be identified with, were not on the table. They weren't yet part of that picture. And if maybe self-identification isn't quite what I meant, maybe encouraging and enabling people to find the routes through which they would be able to get best assistance, so that we can ensure that we're assisting and getting the most from all the employees within the council. To the civil service recently was talking about trying to hire people, with a range of capacities, with reference to neurodiversity. And there's a lot of skills within this room, even, which I believe are attributed because of people's abilities within this remit. And so I would suggest finding ways to support people find the routes to get the, so if they're not currently identified or diagnosed, that we can support them in that journey.
Just like to kind of show you that we do that already. So, a number of employees within our organisation, for example, have had various assessments that we've supported around kind of recognising kind of neurodiversity. So that is already a mechanism in place. And I'm not saying that we haven't got room for improvement, but because that tends to come with, if an employee's the kind of certain things that are coming up, or they're coming and talking to about things that actually sometimes it's putting two and two together to come up with actually, shall we try this route? So we have funded a number of assessments to enable people to have adjustments in the workplace to ensure they can bring the best self to the workplace. So that is already in place, but I'm not saying that there's not room to do more.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harper.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose a bit of an observation, really, and a kind of a question at the end. And I'm heartened to see so much emphasis on flexibility and hybrid working, promoting work-life balance and and acknowledging lifestyle needs. I also think it's very important that, we place emphasis on, having a workforce which reflects the community. I suppose my observation would be that I think we need to think about how we extend that to councillors too. I think no one could claim that as a body of councillors that we are the most representative group possible, and I think there are a kind of number of reasons for that, but I certainly think making participation in council meetings as easy as possible is really important, and I appreciate we operate within a kind of
Sadly is on racial diversity, ethnic diversity, particularly when you compare us to, say, Ipswich, to give an analogy. In terms of meeting accessibility, you mentioned the childcare that the city council will fund for councillors, and that came in a number of years ago. But I appreciate, given the challenges with the childcare market generally, as you acknowledged before the meeting, it's not quite as straightforward as that, which I'm not perhaps so familiar with, not having children. In terms of in further I understand during the COVID period, people were able to participate in council meetings virtually or in a hybrid form, and I believe the new government have said they intend to release the legislation to allow that again permanently. I don't know if any time frame has been set out for that, but I believe it's an intention. But I think there is more that we need to do to certainly encourage those from ethnic minorities to put themselves forwards for Norwich City Council, and I think it would be interesting to hear from people of ethnic minorities what are the current barriers in place and how we should look to overcome them, because we haven't done particularly well to date.
It's interesting about the point about the funding for childcare, because the council will also fund for care almost at the other end of the age spectrum for if you have someone who lives with dementia and needs care and you're a counsellor, but there are similar barriers to accessing carers who can come into the home to be there for an unknown period of time for a meeting, and I think that is some of the challenges, the vagaries of what council meetings look like. Will the meeting that we're here this evening, will we be an hour and a half, will we be 2 hours, will the guillotine come down to 3? You don't know, and it makes these things very challenging. Councillor Maguire, I think you're next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Earlier on I was going to ask about neurodiversity, but I think it's been dealt with very well. And I'd like to thank Dawn Bradshaw, to whom I emailed on this issue and gave me a very full response already. And I'm sure you're prepared to share that email with others if they have any concerns. The other thing that concerns me, and I suppose I'm in this group, I'm the same height as Rishi Sunak and Martin Sheen. And I never thought about it for years, but there is, the unconscious bias thing, height, regional accents is another one, where people make assumptions based on them. And And I'd like to hear a little bit more about those unconscious bias, the ones which have been identified and which work will be done on. Thank you.
I hadn't thought about height before, to be honest. I don't know if an officer's got but you know, I take on board what you mean, particularly with men. There were a lot of you know, jokes at Rishi Sunak's expense, which were perhaps unwise and unkind in that regard. In terms of regional accents, you know, when we looked at the community-led plan earlier this year, you know, we made an inclusion in relation to class, and while there's not necessarily while you know you can be, you know, of a higher social class and have a regional accent, you know, there's often a correlation, or people put one and two together in their minds. So there's been an acknowledgement of those barriers that some people sometimes face. I haven't answered that very well at all, but I don't know, Nick, if anyone else has got a better answer they can give.
What I would say is unconscious bias covers really everything and anything, not necessarily seen characteristics, but can relate to experience, etc. And your bias between two people because this person and that person have had different life opportunities or chances, for example.
It's a much better answer.
So unconscious bias is much bigger than that. I think that there are specific characteristics that people also, and there is also, you were talking about what I think is called presumptive discrimination, which is where you make a presumption about someone. So, I mean, just to speak about myself, a lot of people think I must come from a very posh background because of the way I speak. I don't at all. I actually had hearing problems when I was younger, and I therefore learned how to speak in a different way. So people make an assumption. And that you know, so there is also the assumption side of things as well.
We'll come back.
Please. You've just reminded me. I used to do an experiment with our first years and get them to, well, it would get them to run the experiments, and it was attractiveness, often measured by symmetry, facial symmetry, and the attributions that were made about intelligence or socioeconomic scale, or even a student one year said crimes committed by this person, and again those with the more symmetrical face they thought should be treated more leniently than others. So yes, that's another unconscious bias that we hold.
Yeah, but a particular one is actually recruiting people in the shape of yourself. So that they have the same, sorry, when I say shape, I mean they have the same background as you, for example.
Thank you. Just so that members know who I've seen so far, Councillors Davis, Fox, Galvin, Champion, Padder and Smith. So, and then once we've taken this next round of questions, I'm conscious that we've got to then move on to Councillor Giles's next report on any potential recommendations. So we'll, once we've had this round of questions, we'll see whether we can get to any recommendations, if there are any, or if not, we'll move on to effectively the next item. Councillor Davis, please.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to ask a bit about the ethical debt recovery. So I'd like to know what procedures do enforcement agents have in place to recognise vulnerability and support debtors? And where we have the measures of success, the outcomes, we have debt recovery action is undertaken in an ethical and fair manner. And then we have outcomes, minimal complaints relating to our debt enforcement practices. Where we look at measures of success, rather than looking at minimal complaints, could we not look at perhaps how the mental health of our customers is improved by early help from us, how they feel they've been treated during the process by asking the enforcement agents, you know, can they be asked about that? And I think our ultimate outcome focused measure of success should be no need for enforcement agents to be employed at all by the council in the future if it's managed properly and sensitively at an early stage.
Thank you, Karen. Firstly, I know that Nikki Bristow, our financial inclusion officer, has been working on a financial vulnerability framework to form part of our non-commercial debt policy for our new contractors. I know that piece of work has been drafted. The intention is for that to be rolled out as part of training to revenues and benefits staff and staff in housing income as well. In terms of more broadly, I believe, Nick, you said that you're happy to come in.
Sorry, this is almost about live documents really and updating, but to say that the vulnerability framework has now been extended more widely, not just to cover debt, but to cover vulnerability across the piece, be that domestic abuse. And part of that will be about looking at the whole picture of an individual and understanding that whole picture. So addressing very much the, for example, you were mentioning the mental health needs of people, but considering that the way that we've done that, so the work is now being led by Rachel Amori and myself. So Rachel is independent living manager. We have a workshop. It's on the 16th, Joe. Yeah, 16th of January. We have a workshop with relevant council officers to actually look about all the areas into which we need to extend that and where we get the data sources from to actually build those pictures and to move forward. In terms of the enforcement officers, the specifics around that, we would need to take back to Tanya Vandedecker and get an answer on that.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, because whenever I've tried to contact them, they have been anything but sympathetic to people's mental health needs.
I mean, just to add, I know it's the new debt enforcement contract puts a requirement on the contractor to dynamically align with our non-commercial debt policy, with the intention that as it was amended to reflect that financial vulnerability index being completed and incorporated within the policy, that they wouldn't then have to only comply with the policy as it was drafted at the time of the contract. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fox, please.
Yeah, I just want to ask a bit about the section on domestic abuse, and obviously the reasons that people are in domestic abuse situations are complex, and the reason that they don't leave those situations are complex too. But one of the reasons that people stay in relationships for longer than perhaps is advisable is because of housing insecurity. And while we've got a waiting list, I think there's about 4,000 people on the social housing waiting list. While we're sort of stopping the gap of domestic abuse by offering services to support people, we're not really offering a safe way out. Like we're not supporting people to leave those situations earlier on unless they can have safe, affordable social housing. So I wondered whether one of the things that could be seen as a success in that is getting that number down from 4,000 or whatever it currently is to naught, really, and like whether those.
Yes, if we could remove the housing register altogether, and that would be marvellous, wouldn't it? Yeah, absolutely brilliant. But certainly in terms of domestic abuse, there are elements within our housing allocations policy that mean, obviously, where there is an incidence of domestic abuse, that they have a higher priority. There's a they're considered as a priority within the legislation and within our policy. Obviously, if anything, there is an emergency and there needs to be an emergency move, that's all considered. So, you know, where we can be, obviously some of the issues are some people don't like to report it and it has to be done in a sensitive way, but maybe perhaps under, when we get to the housing allocations item later, when Chris joins us, he can talk a bit more about the domestic, I get the acronym wrong, the domestic abuse thank you. I knew the DAHA that we've been working on and accredited for as well, which talks a bit more about that in detail. Sorry, I forgot the acronym.
If I can just quickly come back on that, I think there's also a grey area between like the situation where a woman or man realises that they're in a domestic abuse situation, and before that there is sometimes a period of reliance, and unless we remove that need for reliance, yeah, so somebody might not always be in a domestic abuse situation. Obviously prevention is better than cure, so that's why I wondered whether the housing situation could be added to domestic.
Yes, but where you've got people who are financially is an element of people being willing and able to report it, but when they do, it's areas that we do support with and help people to find the right accommodation that's suitable for them. But it is tricky and it's not always very straightforward. But there'll be people living in homes that haven't come forward for support and they're in exactly that situation.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Galvin.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the report. And I think it was a year ago in December that we first looked at this, and then it went to Cabinet in January. And it's really good to see all the work that's gone into sort of fleshing it out, putting it together. So it's been a considerable length of time, but it has picked up on so many motions and initiatives, and they're all in there, which is really good to see. And one of them is the newly developed Inclusive Norwich partnership, which has played a huge role, I think, bringing together 3 different sort of strands and a lot of actions. Can you explain a bit more about the partnership? What it's achieved so far, how the council has supported it and how it will be supported to grow in the future?
Thank you, Lucy. So the Inclusive Norwich Partnership brings together various partners who work with people with accessibility needs, Equal Lives, Age UK, Norwich Kind City Map, and Norwich City Council. In terms of how it's worked, so there's been NSIL, Neighbourhood Community Infrastructure Levy funding for 2 Age UK employee funded posts, one focusing on voice and engagement, and one focusing on developing a repository of policy and research best practice for professionals both here at City Hall and in partner organisations. So the main areas of focus have been in relation to the protected characteristics of disability and age, and the latter is linked in very well with the Age Friendly Norwich initiative, and there's been a lot of overlap there. In terms of the priority areas of interest, that there've been housing, health and transport, and they've been the 3 areas that have been looked at most closely. I know the 2 members of staff have shadowed and apologies, I forgot Inclusive Norwich off that list, which is very remiss of me. I know the 2 members of staff that have been employed using the NSIL funding have shadowed an awful lot of different teams within City Hall as part of that work over the last 9 months or so, and they have shadowed some teams at County Hall as well, had engagement with First Buses and Connect, etc. So that's been the main crux of it. So thank you.
Sorry, just the end of the question was how it will be supported to grow in the future. What's the ongoing plan for that partnership?
Thank you. So the partnership is, so the members of staff have been funded via NSIL funding on 12-month contracts, and they've had support from the strategy team here at the City Council. In terms of going forwards, there are difficulties with the NSIL budget insofar as due to the nutrient neutrality restrictions, we've clearly been issuing less planning permissions in recent years, and we have spent a large percentage of that NSIL budget on Norwich Unity Hub for the next 3 years. However, the partnership is actively exploring external funding opportunities to continue the work of the partnership most effectively going forwards. But there will be a website launched in January with that repository of best policy and research that's been produced over the last 9 months. There's also a state of ageing report for Norwich, which has been produced and which will be very useful both for the City Council and for our partners as well. So difficulties with NSIL, but external funding opportunities being actively pursued. Norwich Consolidated Charities has made some contributions towards these projects. I need to be careful what I say because I'm a trustee, but I know that's one of the external funders potentially.
And to add to that, we've written a testimony to be added to their applications in which we commit to ongoing supporting kind using our influencing and our convening powers and whatever else we can bring to the table that will support them, non-financial support.
Would you mind if I just came back on that, perhaps with a slight recommendation? Because I remember when I first heard about this grouping, it seemed, I was told it was a sort of longer term project than a year. It seemed very lively and like it was going a long way, and then it launched a couple of really good things, and some of them aren't fully launched yet. And there's support in kind and hopefully some charitable funding. If that charitable funding doesn't materialise, is there any backstop to help? Because I'm just aware those are voluntary organisations that have done a huge amount of work. And there's probably, I don't know, I haven't spoken to them to find out if they feel that work is at an end, but I would imagine it probably isn't. So what would we do as a council to potentially properly backstop that if the funding isn't forthcoming that's being applied for? Because it's clearly really important work.
I mean, the NSIL was always for 12 months. You know, that was put in the application that was put together by partner organisations. You know, with all NSIL applications like that, they come to myself for comments and they go to the NSIL board. But as I've set out why there's very little money in the NSIL pot at the moment because of nutrient neutrality and the lack of planning consents, because for good reasons we've spent a lot of NSIL money on Norwich Unity Hub, which obviously incorporates a lot of charities and VCSE partners that are working with people with disability issues. I appreciate, that there are financial challenges. You know, if the Green Group does have thoughts in relation to budgets, and budgets are obviously very tight, then please do bring those forwards. But at the moment, in terms of financial support, beyond that in-kind support from the strategy team and political leadership for myself, it would have to come from external partners unless there was some form of amendment to the budget. Nick, I don't know if you've got anything else to say. No.
Okay. Thank you. I've got Councillor Padder next, please. Okay. That's fine. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to everyone involved in putting together this report. It's obviously a lot of information, very detailed. Thank you for your answers so far. Just if I may, wanted to go back to the brief conversation we had on subconscious bias and class. I know that some employers in the recruitment process, they detach various bits of biographical information from statements and answers to questions, like, for example, where people went to university or where they went to school. Is this something we currently do in our hiring practices? Apologies for my ignorance if it is, but if it isn't, is it something we could explore?
I would need to check in terms of where went to school and university, but certainly we do have anonymised information within application forms. For example, names. The shortlisting managers don't get to see the names until after they've shortlisted. So there are various things that we do have in place that actually will make it kind of, you know, you're looking at kind of the skills and qualities and the likes in terms of that. I would need to check what we do about universities and schools, though. Yeah, but certainly there are certain aspects that are anonymised until after the shortlisting has been completed.
And just to add earlier, obviously did mention the recognition we give for non-standard qualifications. Someone might not have that exact, you know, university degree, but if they have, you know, college qualifications perhaps, or they have certain lived experience through their work, then that's looked into.
Just add to that. So in terms of the kind of old process around job roles and the like. So if you look at our job evaluation scheme, which kind of grade schemes and things, it actually doesn't have an emphasis on qualifications at all. It talks about knowledge, and actually we're very cautious about using qualifications because that actually may indirectly discriminate if someone's not had the same opportunities. So there are certain roles that do require qualifications, but actually what we focus on is knowledge. So when we're writing our person specifications, we focus on the knowledge requirements, and that might be gained through, it might be through work experience, it might be through volunteering, it might be through a whole range of aspects. So we do try to address those, and obviously constantly looking at how we can do that better, how we review that.
Thank you. Just picking up ever so slightly on that, Dawn, is there a distinction at the level we're hiring, depending on what information? I'm just conscious that having been on some of the very senior the panels for hiring some of the very senior people, my recollection is we've seen more information at a shortlisting stage that included university and various other things, because we're given the applicant's entire packet at that point.
So we use a different approach in terms of senior leadership roles. It's a different application process. So you'll have seen, Councillor Wright, that's often by kind of CV and submission. So it is slightly different. For most of our roles we go through, we've got a standard kind of application process, but I think that's worth taking away to think about. Now, what I would say in terms of obviously across diversity and inclusion in gender, what we do is when we're appointing a recruitment partner is we always do emphasise and we look at their history in terms of recruiting from a diversity perspective, and obviously that's also information I'm happy to share with you. In terms of when we're appointing a recruitment partner, we do check out the credentials to make sure that they are you know, kind of, I suppose, living what we want them to do in terms of going out there and first of all getting the best candidates, but also ensuring that we are going out to a wide pool of candidates.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Padder and then Councillor Galvin.
Yeah, just quickly, you use a competency framework. Is that how you recruit for kind of seniors and positions?
No, we do have a competency framework across the whole organisation. It's kind of quite a simple one. You see ones that are 100 pages long. Ours is not like that. So we do have a behavioural competency framework for extended leadership team, for heads of service and managers and rest of workforce. What we tend to do is obviously capture requirements in a person specification and job description. And if we're using a recruitment partner, then obviously we'll have a brief, which often includes members in terms of kind of specifying what that looks like. But yeah, we will have some key requirements that we're looking at.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Galvin.
Thank you. Wanted to ask about another thing about housing actually. There's we obviously build houses as well, and accessible and adaptable homes. There is actually a definition of homes that are able to be adapted in the future. So they might not be built at this point. You might know about Habinteg. It's an NGO that works to make all homes built accessible and adaptable. There's a technical standard, M42 it's called. So we could have a resolution as part of our thing that we may have already, and I just don't know about it. The homes we build should be built to M42 minimum standard with 10% at M43, which is a better one. That's because we're basically building homes that more and more people will need to have access needs. There's no point. It's a bit like retrofitting. You don't have to, it's expensive to retrofit homes, but if you can build them when you build them, that they will be adaptable in the future, then you won't have the current figure is a person in a wheelchair on average would have to wait 57 years to get a home that was accessible to their needs. So I don't know if we can specifically have a recommendation to look into including that in our policies.
Okay, so thank you. I was going to say, but so I understand that our head of planning and the planning department are looking into this. I know it's also been one of the areas of focus for one of our, NSIL funded staff as well, in terms of the housing priority. But unfortunately, we don't have anyone from planning here to give further detail at this stage. But we can certainly, provide a more detailed response in writing.
And to say that will be incorporated within this, it's been some feedback that we've received, so we're acting on it, so it will eventually be incorporated.
Pretty in train by the sense of things.
Quickly, because I've had long conversations with Line Homes, and future-proofing, as they call it, is well on their agenda. So it's something they do think about. How might the building be used in the future? How might it need adapting?
Thank you. I'm conscious I'd like to draw this first item to a close. Councillor Galvin, you've used the R word a couple of times in your discussions and your questions about recommendations. Do you have any formal recommendations that you want to propose for this at this stage?
I have noted a few that people have said actually as well as we've gone along, so I could sort of give some out there. So a recommendation to change the measure of success around reasonable adjustments, to sort of survey staff who have needs, rather than, I think that was Councillor Fox.
Sorry, was it to survey those that have had those reasonable adjustments made and how successful they were at overcoming those barriers?
You want to clarify that, Amanda?
Yeah, that was what I was asking, just to make certain that those adjustments have served the purpose they were designed for.
So Councillor Harper can probably clarify this as well, but I think it's a really important one, how we use our voice to make sure that councillors reflect diversity as well, and that we have methods to support all people to be able to be councillors and increase, as you said, our level of diversity within the councillor cohort of disabilities, of backgrounds, of just to really check that we can improve on that. It's a bit of a blind spot.
I've always thought that the councillor one's an interesting one, because the council can do all the things about putting things in place for funding childcare and care, etc. But ultimately, how diverse councillors look is a product of the political parties that select councillors and the electorate's willingness to elect people who perhaps fit a different mould to their perception. Anyway, that's yeah.
So another one I had was to work with Inclusive Norwich to make sure that funding continues and that work is, I mean, this might be something that can go forward in the task and finish group, which was a kind of recommendation, but we haven't spoken about, which is that we've got a task and finish group starting in January, which you're aware of and part of. So being clear about future support and what's needed. There's a poor response rate of key partners. I didn't really ask about that, but it's clear in the report, and it does say there'll be more work into it. But sort of, I think around half of people who are key partners didn't respond. So I think that's a clear recommendation that we go back and find out why and actually rerun that consultation if necessary.
To say that we have and continue to do that. Some partners didn't respond because they were entirely happy with the contents. So we are actually picking all of that up, and some people are not responding to our questions as to why they haven't responded. So if you understand what I mean.
I suppose there's the challenge of how many times do you keep trying to rerun a consultation when you're for your own best endeavours, people aren't engaging.
If I may add, I would say that there was a specific financial inclusion consortium meeting offered for that, but partners felt it was more convenient, given all their challenges they're facing, to input in writing.
And you probably change the consultation. Don't keep rerunning it. You know, if it's not getting answers, you try a different way.
But if they are, yeah. So I'm from the things that we've talked about, I'm just trying to work out which one of those are clear recommendations and which are more sort of general, this would be nice, and then we've had an officer response to say that's already in train. And which specifically would be needing to be considered as part of the task and finish group. Because we need to have recommendations that are firm and actionable and are something for Cabinet to consider as part of this report that's going to them on the 15th of January. Councillor Davis.
Thanks. Yes, could I put forward a recommendation about the ethical debt recovery, that as part of the measure of success, we survey people after or before, during and after the process, just basically to see how their anxiety levels, how their mental health levels, how they feel they've been treated by us and the enforcement agents, and what suggestions do they have about their experiences.
Leonie, are you or is anyone or Jan noting these down so that we
I've got down and I'm just.
Oh, so can you use your mic just so that.
So just to recap, so I've got recommend that we examine the measures of success around reasonable adjustments and survey those people that have used that have been involved to ensure that those measures have served the purpose, and then to look at how we can increase or use the councillor's voice to ensure that councillors, we encourage as much diversity as possible. Work with, as part of the task and finish group, work with Inclusive Norwich to ensure that their work continues. And then the last one about ethical debt recovery, and to look at surveying before, after and during the debt recovery process to ensure to see what suggestions those people may have around what we can do to help improve issues around their mental health and other issues.
Councillor Fox.
Yeah, if I could just add to that list, one of the things came out of something you said, Chair, and that is to anonymise top tier recruitment, and also that as part of that successful recruitment and retention, to promote sort of mental and physical health and a good work-life balance, to properly explore the 4-day week. And the last one is that as a measure of success, like for the domestic abuse section, to include the reduction in social housing waiting list as part of that, as well as the things that were already included.
One of the things I will say on the top tier recruitment, I think I can foresee a challenge in completely anonymising that, simply because when you're dealing with someone who's been director of X at council Y, you need to know work history as part of it, and it will be very easy to work out who they are. That's very different for the situation that you're presented with, I think, elsewhere in the organisations. I appreciate the sentiment in that, but
yeah, I think as much as possible,
yeah. So that would be, I think, would
to stop that kind of mates club kind of.
Yeah. Councillor Harper.
Thank you, Chair. I just on the recommendation about diversity, I just wanted to sort of qualify that a little bit more, and just say I think my point was about sort of challenging and removing barriers to participation as well, because I think actually when it comes to diversity, I think that your points, Councillor Wright, are absolutely right. It depends on a lot of factors, but I think that for underrepresented groups, intersectionality is a big factor, and certainly for women from minority ethnic backgrounds, for example, actually kind of access to childcare, or being able to kind of predict, as you say, the nature of meetings is going to be one of the things that might weigh heavily on their decision about whether they could even consider putting themselves forward. And I also think that there are examples of where we might end up with slightly different outcomes if everyone was able to be present. There are times when for whatever reason, I think it's always good to be in the room, but there are sometimes occasions when it's we are disqualified from participating on the basis of personal characteristics, so I think there is a point, and I take Councillor Giles' point about government suggesting that it's going to relax some of these rules, but I think we should try and use our voice to progress.
Yeah, sure.
So you're talking particularly around encouraging different groups of people to come forward as councillors. So we are planning a lot of work on becoming a councillor. So we're going to be doing some promotion around that to see what we can do, and we can work with all different sorts of groups, but there is also a responsibility of the political groups as well. But if we can work together, that is something that I'd like to put forward, and also to point out that we are undertaking a review of the councillor allowances, and one of the things we will be looking at is what we can do around allowances for carers and childcare allowances. So that's a priority.
And I suppose all of that within the context of what the white paper has to say when that comes out, in terms of what the authority might even look like. Yeah.
But I really appreciate that, and I think that's all of that is very important. I suppose what I'm saying is that there's also an issue when it comes to participation of people that are already here, and that that worries me. If I couldn't participate because I have children, for example, it narrows the it comes back to that point about representatives who mirror the city, and so I wouldn't want parents to and I'm picking on parents just because it's a very live issue for me at the moment, but I wouldn't want parents to be excluded from decision making about certain things just because of the time of meetings, for example.
I mean, it's a really valid point, because we effectively exclude people who work full time from participating in the planning process, because you can't come along to planning for potentially all day on a Thursday. So yeah, it is a real difficult one to make everything work. But yeah, really really valid points there. Councillor Fox.
Just to build on that, because I do think it's a really important point, you know, employers are expected to give counsellors time off for civic duties, but in the sort of the work landscape that we have now, many people aren't in full-time employment. Many people are sort of doing alternative types of work where where if they ask for time off for civic duties, they'll just be replaced. And I have no idea what we can do to like support people in those roles into becoming counsellors, but I think it's important that those voices get heard too. So I don't know if we can have a look at that, and I don't know, just even acknowledging it and looking at it is a start.
Councillor Galvin.
Yeah, I think it would be good to have a recommendation around the consultation, because it's only 44% of peers that actually fed back, and it does say it's not yet known why 56% didn't respond. So just a definite recommendation to make sure we better understand that and actually look at the processes and perhaps bring that back to scrutiny in the future, because we want for this to be a robust strategy, it has to have been a peer-led or at least heavily peer input, and less than half isn't that, is it?
Responses since, so we are now just over half, but absolutely understand your point. So thank you.
It's not 52-48, is it?
I think the other point is that it is a live document. So, you know, what I said at the start about it being the start of the conversation with partners, not the end, and, you know, continuous engagement.
Councillor Champion.
I feel it's pertinent. We've discussed parents, but one of the things I would like to highlight is you might have there are areas of multiple deprivation. And so we're talking about inequality. And if you've got people who are suffering inequality from multiple different perspectives, the council needs to make doubly sure that they are addressing those in order, so that I'm aware of people, who are subject, face multiple deprivation and have multiple inequalities as a result of that. And so I feel like we need to ensure that that's something that we are very aware of and mindful of.
Thank you. Jan, how many recommendations do you? Yeah. Oh, do you want to pop the mic on? But for the ones
I've got 9.
For the ones you haven't read out already, can you just read those out so that members have the wording so we know?
Trying to read my own writing.
Yeah.
So there's something around what we can do further about anonymising our top tier recruitment. There was something around properly exploring a 4-day week and making sure we understand why people haven't responded to the original survey. And I think that's all I've got on the last points that I hadn't read out.
Okay, thank you. So those are the wording will be tidied up by the time they make their way to cabinet, but those will form, if members are happy, the basis for cabinet to consider looking at whether those can be incorporated. Are members happy with that? Yeah, great, thank you. Do you want a formal?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. Yes. We'll have a formal show of hands on that. Yeah. Okay. Right, so in which case we'll now move on to the next item on the agenda, which we've got the slide deck up already for, a quality information report. I did think when Teams crashed part of the way through that you weren't going to have that, but they only got it back again, so yeah.
So this is the annual quality information report, and it's a interim report insofar as
Sorry, Councillor Giles, can you pop your mic on for anyone who's
apologies. So this is the annual Equality Information Report. We're in a sort of state of limbo, as it were, this year, because in future years the EIR will report against the new EDI action plan, but obviously that will first happen next year. So what's changed? The big answer is not an awful lot. The demographic profile is mainly unchanged because the underlying data sets don't change every year. However, there has been a 71% increase in the number of requests for translations and interpretations from customers. That's obviously a very large increase. We believe this is primarily as a result of the increased numbers of refugees, asylum seekers being granted refugee status at a greater pace within the asylum hotels, and then entering the mainstream system where they're seeking homelessness support or home options banding. Racial hate crimes and racial hate incidents continue to represent the most frequently occurring form of hate crime in Norwich. There is a very slight decrease in the number of reported transgender hate crimes, but it is still, of course, still too high, and those are are very small numbers, so it's difficult to gauge much from that. There is a very slight increase in the ethnic diversity of our council tenants. We know that's quite low. Norwich's employment rate remains similar to last year. It's currently over 6% higher than the national rate. Moving on to headline achievements, so a number of these have been spoken about in the last item. So we established the first employee network, the Pride Network, which I believe mainly thank Leonie for her hard work on. The Inclusive Norwich Partnership, already discussed that, and working with Age UK, the successful application to be an age-friendly city, join the UK's network of age-friendly communities. And last slide, a very quick presentation, the onward journey. So following consideration of this paper, which is a it will then go to Cabinet in January. Happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, open to questions for the EIR. Councillor Carrington.
Thank you. In relation to the increased need for translation and interpretation services, what is being done to keep that sustainable in relation to us continuing to provide the services?
Thank you, Jess, for the question. So we contract our translation services from Intran, which is run from Norfolk County Council. So we pay a set contract fee, and then we pay by translation for translations beyond that core contract fee. There has been an overspend given the amount of demand, but obviously we wouldn't, it goes without saying that we wouldn't deny anyone a translation on that basis. In terms of meeting that additional budgetary provision, where we can illustrate that the reason why that translation is needed is relation to asylum seekers and refugees. There is Home Office funding that we can potentially use next year towards addressing that budget gap.
Councillor Maguire, then Councillor Galvin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. I'm sure it's in there, but for the life of me, I can't see it. Don't we normally report among employees the multiplier between the lowest paid and the highest paid? And what is it currently?
That normally comes in a report to full council. I don't know if Dawn, if you've got any more information on that.
Part of the kind of transparency requirements that's published in the annual pay policy statement that we normally bring to full council around about February, March time. I can't remember what it is though, to be honest. I don't think it's moved significantly. I think it decreased last time. I can look it up and let you all know. I just can't remember what it is off the top of my head.
Watch this space.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Galvin.
Thank you. Two things. I'm interested in the Go for Less card. You know, how many people have it and what the trends are, how it's used and how we monitor how it's used. Obviously, it's quite, I think it says in the report we want to, or it's in the action plan to increase that. And the other one is on page 96. Can we see the breakdowns as a percentage of the population of the city, if to check if they're disproportionate? 96, I think, in the main report numbers, not in the individual paper numbers. So in other words, what I'm driving at is to see proportionality, basically.
So in terms of Go for Less, I'm just I can't find the information to hand. I do get that reported to me, but unfortunately I just can't find the right file. But we're happy to provide that information and that detail. A couple of years ago when I took over the sport and leisure portfolio, it was very difficult to get a Go for Less card. You could only get one by going in person to the Norman Centre, and we were still only offering it to those on legacy benefits. So as soon as I started and noticed that, it was expanded to universal credit, which was obviously necessary, and it is now possible to obtain that card online. So we've entered the 21st century in that regard. I believe numbers have been significantly increasing. We did a promotion for it in the last Citizen magazine, but I can't find those specific figures to hand, but happy to provide them to you in due course. In terms of complaints and geographical distribution, I don't know if anyone has, I don't know if either of you know any more, or whether we're going to have to go back to you, or are we going to have to go to Julia Medler and come back?
We can certainly see if we can get that information for you. So you want it broken down by sort of what we've got versus the demographics of.
In the past, we've just checked that we're making sure we hear from everyone that we need to hear from, and it'd be really interesting to hear about the Go for Less card and the sort of impact assessment done around it. And you know, it's good that that's increased, and it'd be good to hear. Perhaps that's a recommendation for the future in this area.
Okay, thank you. Any other members have any questions? No? Okay, great. Do you want to make that formal recommendation then about the Go for Less?
Yeah, if you're happy with that, Adam, to sort of, you can probably formulate that in a useful way to have incorporate it into this reporting and have an impact assessment of, you know, who has the card and what they use it for and what it could be used for, in line with well-being and other work in that area.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly greater detail for our own two leisure centres than other venues, but certainly in terms of overall uptake compared to, you know, prior to it being online, etc. You know, we can certainly, you know, show figures in relation to that.
And do we, sorry, I'm expanding this a bit now, but do we capture usage data at our own centre? So we know whether some person's going, you know, 3 times a week and someone else buys it and then doesn't use it at all, and that kind of thing.
Yes. There's lots of different usage figures and statistics that are reported both by Places Leisure and internally for the Norman Centre. Yeah. So you can look into what information people would like to see.
Great, thank you. I don't know if we need to formally have that as a formal recommendation. Yeah. Yeah, okay, that's fine. But I think that's all seems to be. What, did anyone else have anything they wanted to say on this? And if not, we'll move on to home options. No, great. Thank you very much then. Thank you very much for the all of your presentation, and for officers for your answers. And we'll just have a brief pause while we move around a little bit. Thank you. Okay. Right. So we're now on to page 100. Yeah. Nice guy. Okay. So we're now on to page 111, home options. So we've got a report that provides us some information to note, and we need to consider whether further scrutiny is required. So if questions can be about points of clarification on the briefing note we've got, rather than scrutinising the sort of full home options programme, we should note at this stage that it is up for renewal in 2026, and it may well be that we might like to pre-scrutinise the work that goes on around its renewal. But without any further ado, Chris, did you want to say anything on it, or shall I get members to go straight into questions? Straight into questions then. So who's got some questions for Chris? Okay, Councillor Carrington, then Councillor Catt. Thank you.
Thank you. It speaks about multi-agency meetings, and a lot of the inquiries we get as councillors are when people are believing that their medical evidence isn't being taken into account when deciding banding. So what I wanted to know is, are, for example, GPs invited to such multi-agency meetings?
GPs aren't invited. The panel is made up of medical professionals, so we'll have a senior OT, 2 senior OTs, an OT. If the OT is involved in the case, the OT will be invited to come along. And we have two mental health managers as well. Then we have the home options team leader also. It hasn't proved viable in the past to invite a GP. Normally you have to pay for a GP for a start, even to communicate with you. So this is the most viable option for us.
Councillor Catt.
No, I just wanted to ask about the figures on direct lets, because it says that we've permanently allocated 34 properties, and then it lists different categories, but the numbers don't add up to 34, they add up to 78 on page 115.
That 34 were made through the tenancy team, so they're moving a tenant from one place to another, and the others 28 are to homeless households, and then if you add all the numbers up, including the homeless households, so if you're statutorily homeless, to get you out of temporary accommodation quicker, then we'll direct let you into the next available property. But there's a difference between that kind of direct let and a direct let where the neighbourhood housing team identifies somebody, put in a request to move them to somewhere else for whatever reason it is, and that's agreed by a panel, and then that goes to a direct let as well.
Any other questions on home options? Councillor Galvin.
So it's not, I mean, this is, you'll have to tell me if this is going into more an area where we'd need to scrutinise it more. I'm just interested from some casework I've had that to know what we do and don't record in terms of people that come to us and then can't be helped. So and I mean, there's a whole area of like how we speak to people, which I think would come up if we did a bit. Perhaps I can send you some of these questions in. It might be a better way to do it because you can give fuller responses. But really, I'm interested at this point in so what other data we record in terms of need. So when people come to us, like when we drop a case for some reason, when a case is half completed, how do we record them? But I think these are all questions that could be formulated and asked more formally.
What you're talking about, I think, is housing options generally, which includes homeless clients, people who are facing homelessness. That's not home options. Home options is just strictly the allocations policy. So within home options, we record those people that we can't help. They're in standard band. They're the people who haven't got any priority need. And so we'll be in standard band and we'll, bid away in that band and haven't given any priority. What you're talking about referring to is homelessness and prevention of homelessness, which does feed into this, but isn't recorded within the home options sort of allocation scheme.
Just to clarify that, so if we did want to scrutinise it, which is the policy that's being redone? Is it the whole thing, the whole home options? I think I've perhaps mistaken the terminology here.
Well, certainly the Scrutiny work programme had on it a consideration of home options. So we've taken what was on the Scrutiny work programme for further consideration. So the policy that we referred to in terms of being renewed in 2026 is the allocations policy. So it's how we allocate social housing. So that is the policy that will be considered, and home options is that the process by which we allocate social housing. As Chris has said, we wanted to keep it tight on home options because that was what was listed in the Scrutiny sort of forward plan. If we start going to other areas, obviously we have masses of data that we have to submit to central government on very, very regular occurrences, and we are scrutinised by central government on that. We have visits from the ministry, and a lot of our funding relies on us providing information in terms of preventions, relief, homelessness. We are scrutinised quite a lot in that. So obviously we've kept it relatively simple because housing allocations by its very nature is quite a complicated thing. It's a national system we work within and lots of rules and regulations. So it's the housing allocations policy. So how this council allocates people to social housing is the one that in 2026 will be renewed. Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Maguire, did you indicate?
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, I must say I'm glad I don't work in housing options. You have an impossible task. And as I'm sure all the members here, I'm a constant correspondent with you, and thank you for the work that you're doing the impossible. I'm just wondering whether you might consider in this review looking at your silver banding. It's such a big one. Is there a way of refining it? I don't repeat silver, gilt silver and nickel silver. I don't know, but it just seems to be so many sitting in that band. Is there a more sophisticated way either looking at silver or saying, are we actually correct in the way that we allocate? Thank you.
By its nature, there are so many variables that we have to take into consideration, and there's always the potential we could have 100 different bands. It's very difficult. The Olympic system, the gold, silver, bronze, is was the preferred one of the government when choice-based lettings was sort of introduced in around 2010, and we've sort of kept faithfully to that. What we try to do is keep things as simple as we can without overcomplicating, just for the sake of the client and for ourselves also. Is, as I said, there are a lot of variables, but certainly we will look at everything when we look at the new policy. And there's new legislation coming out all the while as well. New guidance from the government comes out every year. So these are all the things that we'll be looking at when we look at the new policy.
Okay, thank you. Got Councillor Harper and Councillor Fox, then Councillor Davis.
Thank you. Mine's sort of related to the question that Councillor Maguire just asked. I'm interested to know how that sort of second tier, how the volume that we have compares to other kind of comparable local authorities. If you can share anything about that. And I obviously appreciate that average waiting times aren't recorded because of the nature of the beast, but I'm interested in understanding I assume we do have data on this, but if there is a way of extrapolating the data to tell us about the movement between the bands, and and how we sort of how people progress through that, if that makes sense.
In terms of comparison, we know that we've got more people on our register than anybody else. We take more applications than anybody else. We take more homeless approaches than anybody else. We take more contact than anybody else, and demand is far greater. Obviously, but we don't do any direct comparisons. We can say that we're the busiest, and social housing in Norwich is in extremely high demand, and demand is far higher here than it is anywhere else in Norfolk. Absolutely right. Yeah. So what was the second part of your question again?
It was just about I don't know if
the movement.
Well,
there's not that much movement unless your circumstances change. If you're overcrowded by one unit, you're in silver band. Not much is going to change. You can bid in silver bands. You can amend your bids to be as realistic as possible to try and be successful, but you're not through weighting or anything like that. Nothing's going to change. It's only when your circumstances change that you kind of move up and down the system.
I mean, this is a bit of a niche question, I suppose, but it just, because of the item we were discussing previously, I'm sort of interested in things like progressive conditions, for example, and kind of just understanding the practicalities of what impact they have on so how we sort of I suppose I just want to understand how we manage that kind of process.
Yeah, absolutely. If somebody's circumstances change, including a medical condition newly diagnosed or a deterioration of medical condition, that client will be encouraged to submit a medical assessment, and it will go before the medical panel to be assessed. So we do take account of that. We always kind of say every application is under constant review, because we're obviously understanding of the fact that things change all the while. So it's never a sort of stagnant picture. The number on the register will change every day. It'll go up and down, things like that. So yeah, if someone's circumstances change, it's something that will get looked at.
And I think, I can think of an example where I've seen someone go from effectively standard, right at the very bottom, medical change, gold, and the process does work in that respect. Jan, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just going to come in because what I was thinking is, from the questions that are coming out, there was, it's a complicated process. And what I'd like to suggest to councillors is that we arrange for you to have a briefing on how the options process work. And what I would ask that though is, if we arrange that, would councillors get their questions that they may have on the process to us in advance, so that we can cover them all off in that briefing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
If we feed that in and do that at the right time, then when we start to develop the new allocations policy, and it will come here for obviously pre-scrutiny before it goes to cabinet, that will be useful, because everyone's working on it from the basis of some understanding of how it currently is. Although, as Chris said, there is a lot of changes at any one point in time that we have to contend with. So, and we can get some more of the comparative data, although Chris said it is quite difficult. Where I was from, we were in a sub-region, and it's even difficult to match across a sub-region because of so many different variables in it.
Councillor Fox, you were up next, please.
My question was also about allocation, so it might be better served.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, thanks. So mine's about the bidding system. So obviously Thursday morning, everyone goes on their computer and bids. How do they bid if they don't have internet access? What's the method? Do they ring up? Do they come in?
Yeah, there's different means. You can ring up, we'll place bids for you. There's also an assisted list, which tends to be for older clients. Well, we've got a list. We'll send out a paper newsletter. Then we'll call the client later in the week and ask if they want to place any bids or not. Sometimes they haven't received the newsletter, so we'll read it through to them. But we're very mindful that not all clients have got access to the internet. And to make an application to Home Options, you need to call us. So there's no online applications, which kind of makes everyone's life simpler, really.
Thank you. Any other questions at this stage, or can you put your questions together and we'll link them into the briefing that we have, which I think will be very helpful.
If you find that the questions that come in don't sort of fit into the right thing for a briefing, then perhaps we can have another look at how we could scrutinise. If it's obvious that a lot of people are asking about a certain thing and it won't be, then yeah, thanks.
Yeah, Councillor Fox.
Yeah, with the phone call thing, is there another way? So if people find phone calls particularly difficult, is there another way for them to apply for the home option scheme?
We have still got some paper forms that we send out. Yeah, we try not to. We encourage that conversation at the first point of contact.
So if somebody, like, say, I'm just thinking about some people with specific mental health needs might find actually making a phone call difficult. How do they apply if they can't actually make that initial phone call?
What happens is they would normally email in, or an advocate or a friend can email in, and we'll ping a form out to them and they can complete it with the support and evidence. We'll put it on the system for them.
Right, well, thank you very much for that. I think we'll draw that item to a close. Thank you, Chris, for sitting through everything else, for then being with us quite briefly at this stage. So we'll move on to item 7, which is a very brief update from me on the Norfolk Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I've now attended 2 of those as sub. So the first one was a standard meeting, and we looked at 2 items. We looked at prisoner healthcare. So we received quite a long and detailed briefing on the healthcare that's available for people in the various custodial settings across Norfolk and some of the challenges that brings. Conversely, some aspects of healthcare, particularly dentistry, you will be able to access faster in either one of the custodial settings across Norfolk than you would be in general population. So that was that. We also then looked at the 6-month update on mortality data action plan, which was a really sort of eye-opener in many respects in terms of deaths going through the Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust, data around unexplained, unexpected, and how the family liaison officers that have recently come into play have really assisted with that process, and the feedback coming through from families. And there were some family advocates there talking about how those family liaison officers have really improved the way that a very difficult situation is handled. So that was the first meeting. And the second meeting, which was last week, looked at the proposal to close Toffwood Medical Centre, and following the scrutiny and representations from people from the local community, it was unanimously agreed by the committee to ask the Secretary of State to call in that decision. On paper, it looked like the right thing to do, but there were too many questions from the committee. So I think it's really good to see that sort of cross-party working there. Anyway, so yes, that was a very brief update on a couple of NHOSCs, and yeah. And then we move on to the last item on our agenda, which is the Scrutiny Work Programme. The only thing I think of note is we should have been looking at the at NCSL today, and that is going to be coming back in the summer, do we think? Yeah, as it wasn't ready. Councillor Galvin.
Could I just ask that the minutes of the last meeting are circulated before, as soon as they're ready, rather than waiting till the next, if possible, because there were 2 of them, weren't there?
Yes, of course. We will get those circulated in their draft format ahead, as soon as they're ready. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Right. Well, on that basis that we're done, thank you very much for your attendance, and we'll